Welcome to U.S. News Source Channel. Explosions occurred on the territory of Russia. Unmanned aerial vehicle attacks were reported in the Kursk region of Russia. Targeted areas caused panic in Moscow. Mysterious moves are exhausting Russia's remedy. Russian authorities began to flee from an area in the east. Progress has been made on the critical line on the Luhansk front. Russian administration, which was stationed on the line, began to move away from the region. Intense conflicts in the east continue to increase day by day. Control can pass completely to Ukraine at any moment. Operations on critical fronts intensify. At the same time, command points were hit with precision in Luhansk. Russian logistics flows in the region are under threat. Operational power of the Russian soldiers is being reduced. Developments on the fronts now determine the fate of the war on behalf of the countries. Increased operations on the territory of Ukraine in recent days have begun to be felt on the territory of Russia. Explosions, which increased day by day, started to increase the panic in Moscow. Advance of the Ukrainian army, especially on the Eastern Front, puts Russia even more concerned. Because as it is known, as the dominance in the east increases, it can be deployed more in the regions close to the Russian border. This may cause the war to spread to Russian territory. It is also known that attacks on Russian soil were started and increased, especially after Russia increased its attacks on infrastructures. In the past few days, explosions have occurred in many parts of Russia. These explosions took place at Russian military points. Many Russian military sites were engulfed in flames. On top of that, Russia's defense inadequacy emerged due to the inability to prevent these attacks. Since Russia sent many military equipment to the war in Ukraine, it began to have difficulties even in protecting its own country. Explosions still continue on the territory of Russia. This time, explosions occurred on the eastern outskirts of Russia's Kursk region, which is close to the border. It was reported that mysterious attacks were carried out against the region at night. It was reported that the first explosions were heard with a loud sound, followed by explosions near the military airport on the east side. According to the statements, the airport in the Kursk region was attacked with an unmanned aerial vehicle. Then it was announced that the fuel storage tank at this airport was blown up. Moscow panicked. It is also known that these attacks remain a mystery. It is also stated that the railway in the region may have been targeted. Considering that military shipments flow from this border area by rail, targeting such military logistics points is also considered a strategy. To remind you, many Russian military logistics points were targeted both in Crimea and on Ukrainian soil before. By neutralizing these points, it is aimed that the Russian army will not be able to provide a supply flow on the territory of Ukraine. Because in this way, the attack power of the Russian soldiers in the operations is also reduced. This causes the soldiers on the front to be defenseless and to retreat. If the operations against such strategic points are increased, the Ukrainian army will gain serious advantages. In fact, it may become possible to completely retake the Eastern Front, where logistics flow cannot be achieved. This will change the course of the war. For this, the struggles continue unabated. It is also known that Donbass was one of the reasons Russia started the war. In recent days, mutual attacks on this front have started to increase. This situation puts a lot of pressure on the Russian army. As it is known, the Ukrainian forces launched record attacks on this front. As a result of these targeted attacks, the operations gained momentum with the additional military reinforcements sent to the front. Moreover, it is known that this front is the regions where Russia suffered the greatest losses. Increasingly, these operations on the front force the Russian soldiers to either flee or surrender. In this way, the Ukrainian armed forces can gain serious advantages on this front. Moreover, new developments are taking place on this Donetsk and Luhansk front every day. This time, it was reported that the Ukrainian artillery units hit 4 command points in Luhansk belonging to the Russian soldiers. Head of the Luhansk Oblast Military Administration, Haidai, made a statement regarding the situation at the front, and announced that the Ukrainian defense units repulsed the attacks of the Russian forces near the Stelmakivka, Novoselivsk, Chervenopopivka, and Plashchenka regions during the day. Attacks hit on this front and the command and headquarters points hit in these attacks scared the Russian authorities. It is known that when the situations at the front became more difficult, the Russian authorities and commanders were able to leave before and leave the Russian soldiers alone. Soldiers at the front, on the other hand, do not know where to go and what moves to make, and they suffer serious losses. In fact, when this happened before, it increased the panic in Moscow and changes were made in the commanders. But when there are still difficulties in the regions, commanders and senior Russian officials are trying to move away from these regions. This situation causes the motivation of the Russian army to decrease to a great extent. Motivation of these soldiers, who are already dealing with many problems and suffering significant losses, becomes almost impossible for them to achieve success. However, similar situations have been reported. Now, it was seen that the Russian administration officials stationed in Svatov, the critical line in the Luhansk region, fled towards the center. Serhiy Haidai, head of the Luhansk Oblast military administration, announced that the Russian authorities in this region have moved to the Luhansk center. These officials reportedly set out for the center when they saw that the Ukrainian armed forces were close to Svatov and getting closer and closer. Fact that these Russian officials want to move away from the area where they are stationed shows that the developments on the front are now completely in favor of Ukraine. These officials, who are trying to escape, cause tension in Moscow. It is also known that this Svatov-Kreminna line is of critical importance for both countries. Located at a very important point in Donbass, this highway line moves towards the center. This causes it to become an important military supply point for the soldiers. For this, it becomes much more important to have full control over this line. It is stated that the reason is that in case of control over the line, the military shipment flows of the other party may be interrupted. At the same time, thanks to the dominance of this region, which is in a critical position, significant advantages will be gained on the front. This will greatly affect the course of the war. Moreover, Russia continues its latest efforts. Unsuccessful in ground operations, the Russian army tries its luck in favor of air and sea attacks. It was even stated that Russian troops launched attacks in various regions. These attacks are mostly carried out with missiles. Some of these missiles are launched from warships with Kalibr cruise missile carriers deployed over the Black Sea. However, because these missiles are quite expensive, Russia now only deploys these missiles when it is going to attack. After the attack, it takes its missile-laden ships away from the Black Sea waters again. This shows that Russia is now trying to protect its ammunition and is afraid of possible attacks. The reason for this may be that their current ammunition and military resources are gradually decreasing. It is getting more difficult for Russia to supply new ammunition to replace these ammunition, which is decreasing day by day. Due to increased sanctions and damage to defense industry areas, spare parts production and repair of equipment in Russia are becoming much more difficult. This makes it impossible to repair existing military resources, let alone to provide new military resources. In the long run, all kinds of developments on these fronts and all kinds of ammunition used in attacks are of even more critical importance regarding the war. Now, especially for Russia, there is no margin for error. Although the Ukrainian armed forces continue their correct moves with successful operations, it can be possible to end this war started by Russia. This will prove to the whole world the successful struggle of the Ukrainian army and the military inadequacies of Russia. Tensions between countries have also increased considerably. This requires more careful selection of steps. Otherwise, if one side makes a mistake, it will allow the other side to gain a great advantage. Each move must also be determined in a strategic direction. We'll see what happens in the next few days. We have reached the end of another video. You can support us by liking the video. You can easily follow new videos by subscribing. I wish you all a war-free day. See you.